Hey guys, my name is Brad, and I've been wanting to talk about one of the projects I've been working on just in my own free time for a little bit. The purpose of this project was really for me to try and learn something new with programming. It's the same reason I start most of my projects, just to see if I can do something. The project is a game written in Java using Eclipse as an editor. Now, I'd gone into things like networking and multiplayer games before, but I really wanted to try a couple of new things. So here is the game in its original functional form. At this point, it was tile-based and used Perlin noise map generation. It featured multiplayer, applet support. There were multiple server modes. You could run the server as an applet, or you could run it through the command line. You could chop down trees and get logs, so there's some interaction with the map and some inventory and item getting. There was horrible animation. As you can see, I drew all these tiles in Paint in about 30 seconds each. All visual elements of the game at this point were made in Paint. No external libraries were used, mostly just Java AWT stuff. Now this is my sprite sheet that I used. This is where I drew the tiles from. So this is done by loading in the entire image and drawing a portion of it to parts of the 2D applet. Here is the one and only item that the game featured so far, was the log that you could pick up. And here is the character animation sprites. I didn't feel like animating the character facing different directions because this was really proof of concept. So as you can see, his legs disappear. That's him walking, and the arrow always points in the direction he's facing. This is the sprite that would appear when you were hitting a tree or anything else. And the bottom row is you when you were standing in water. They're slightly offset vertically, so you bob up and down when you're in the water. Now, this was all stuff I'd done before, so I decided to try something I'd put off learning for a while. I decided to take this game and make it 3D. This was pretty much the first version of what I was able to crank out. At this point, I was using lightweight Java Games library, a little bit of OpenGL. I carried over all the code from the 2D version. I was still using the same 2D trees. You'll notice a white horizontal line cutting right through the middle of the image. This was fixed by drawing the texture just a little bit too big on the quads. All these tiles that you see are just individual quads with a portion of the texture drawn on them. Here you can see some 3D trees, and that red block is supposed to be the player. Now at this point I wasn't using any lighting, so everything looks very flat. At this point I had redone the tiles, still nothing special, but I created them using GIMP, and they were a little easier to look at. I also experimented with the trees some more, seeing what looked natural and what could still be rendered quickly. This was my new sprite sheet. This image was created using GIMP. I made the tiles not used a more distinctive color so that it would be more obvious when there was texture bleeding. My next challenge was to add a GUI. So I found out to do that was going to be a little more complicated than I expected it to be. It was not as simple as telling OpenGL to draw a button and then draw some text on top of it. I really had to define what a button was by saying, oh, it's a quad, and then handling a click by translating the 2D screen coordinates of that click to the 3D world coordinates and figuring out if that was within the confines of that rectangle. To draw text on top of these buttons, I actually had to draw a sprite sheet of all the characters I wanted to be able to draw on the screen. And that proved to be a little trickier than I expected. This one didn't work so well. What I found out is that the width to height ratio had to be correct. So this is my new sprite sheet. It's a lot smaller, and it's white so that I can apply colors to it with OpenGL. This one worked a lot better. So this is the original one. As you can tell, the width of the letters changes all over the place. The spacing is not good. That is not attractive to look at or to read, and even very difficult to read. This is the better looking one. As you can tell, I hadn't quite centered it and spaced it correctly, but all of the letters are pretty much the same width and legible. Now those boxes you see, those are part of the font sheet that I hadn't filled in the letters for yet. If I zoom in, you can see these are what it was drawing back when some of these letters had not been drawn yet. It's a little big here, and I hadn't finished drawing the font yet, but it would retain its shape when I resized it. Different characters would not become thinner than others when I changed the scale of the letters. And this is the world at that point. I was experimenting with lighting a little, so as you can tell the trees are different shades on different sides. And I was experimenting with putting the player's name above where they would be standing. So that's what the game looks like now. It still really has no game mechanic. Pretty much the only thing you can do is see your fellow players walking around if you're on multiplayer, and chop down trees and pick up logs. When I started to flesh out what I wanted to turn the game into, it felt a bit too ambitious for my first big game creation project. It turned out I wanted to turn it into something that actually means something to me. So I decided to instead switch over to a different idea, which actually ended up being equally as ambitious, but I fully intend on finishing it. I may do a video about that project in the future. Until then, if you want to see some of my other projects, you can check them out by visiting any of these links. And if you'd like to see the game in action in both its 2D and 3D forms, I'll provide a link for that as soon as I finish a video for it. And thanks for watching.